When the nurse placed the baby in my arms, my world didn't just slow down, it stopped. The child's skin was dark. Mine is pale. My wife's is pale. I felt my throat tighten as I whispered, "Honey, is there something you need to tell me?" She laughed nervously, brushing sweat from her forehead. "It's just genetics acting weird," she said. But her eyes? They weren't matching her words. Inside me, a storm began. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and forced smiles. Every time I looked at our son, a tidal wave of conflicting emotions crashed over me. I loved him instantly, this tiny, helpless being. But the doubt, it was a poison seeping into every corner of my mind. My wife, Sarah, seemed to sense the chasm growing between us. She'd watch me with a sad, pleading look, but we never spoke of the elephant in the room. The unspoken question hung in the air, thick and suffocating. How could this happen? Was I living a lie? My friends and family were no help. They'd come to visit, cooing over the baby, and then shoot me confused glances when Sarah wasn't looking. My mom pulled me aside one day. "He's a beautiful baby, sweetheart," she'd said, her voice gentle. "But he doesn't look a thing like you." Her words, meant to be comforting, were like salt in an open wound. The whispers and side eyes became a constant backdrop to my life. I started avoiding people, isolating myself. The joy that should have come with a new baby was replaced by a gnawing anxiety. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. The baby was crying. Sarah was exhausted, and I felt like I was about to explode. I went out for a drive, my mind racing. I scrolled through old photos on my phone, searching for answers for something, anything that made sense. I found pictures of our wedding, of us happy and in love. How did we get here? I stopped at a 24-hour diner, ordered a coffee I didn't drink, and just stared out the window. The reflection showed a man I barely recognized, haunted, tired, and deeply unhappy. I knew I had two choices. I could let this suspicion destroy my family, or I could confront the truth, whatever it was. The thought of a DNA test made my stomach churn. What if it confirmed my worst fears? Could I handle that? Could my marriage survive it? But what was the alternative? Living in this limbo, this silent war. I drove home, the first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon. I walked into the nursery and saw Sarah asleep in the rocking chair. Our son nestled against her chest. In that moment, seeing them together, a wave of love so fierce hit me that it knocked the air out of my lungs. He was my son. He was our son. But I still needed to know. The next morning, I told Sarah we needed to talk. I laid it all out, my doubts, my pain, the whispers, everything. Tears streamed down her face, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't just give me a placating answer. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "I swear to you, there's no one else. There never has been." But then she dropped a bombshell. Her grandmother, her father's mother, was a woman of color. The family never spoke of it. Her grandfather had disowned his own son for marrying her, and the story was buried, a painful secret passed down through whispers. Sarah's father was fair-skinned, as was she, but the genes, she explained, they were there, dormant. It was almost too incredible to believe. A hidden family history, a secret kept for generations, now revealed in the face of my son. We spent hours talking, Sarah sharing stories she'd only ever heard in fragments. She showed me a faded black-and-white photograph she had hidden away, a picture of a beautiful, smiling woman with kind eyes. Her grandmother, and looking at that picture, then at my son sleeping peacefully in his crib, I saw it. The resemblance was subtle, but it was there. The shape of his eyes, the curve of his smile. We decided to do a DNA test anyway, not out of distrust, but for closure. For all of us. And for our son, so he would never have to wonder about his heritage. The weeks we waited for, the results were tense, but different. We were a team again, united against the unknown. We talked more than we had in years, rebuilding the trust that had been so badly broken. We rediscovered each other, not as the perfect couple we pretended to be, but as two flawed people trying to navigate an impossible situation. When the results came, we opened the email together, our hands clasped so tightly my knuckles were white. I held my breath as my eyes scanned the page. Paternity confirmed. The relief was so overwhelming, I started to cry. Not just tears of joy, but tears of shame for ever doubting my wife. Tears for the weeks of happiness I had lost to suspicion. Sarah held me, and we just cried together, for all the pain, the fear, and the ultimate, beautiful truth. Looking back, that difficult time was a strange and unexpected gift. It forced us to confront a hidden part of our family's past, and, in doing so, it brought us closer than ever. Our son's birth didn't just start our family, it healed it. It unearthed a story of love that had triumphed over prejudice decades ago. And it taught me a profound lesson about trust, identity, and the surprising ways the past can shape the future. Now, when I look at my son, I don't see a question. I see a legacy. I see the beautiful, improbable, and perfect blend of our family's story. And I've never been more proud. For 2 days, I lived a lie. On the outside, I was the proud new father, smiling, accepting congratulations, bringing my wife tea while she recovered. But on the inside, a storm was raging. My heart was a tangled mess of knots, each one pulled tighter by the minute. Every single time I looked at the baby, this tiny, helpless being we had supposedly created together, a wave of sickness washed over me. It was a toxic cocktail of guilt and suspicion, and it was poisoning everything. The guilt was for the thoughts swirling in my head, the dark whispers that wouldn't leave me alone. I felt like a monster for even thinking them. But the suspicion was a persistent, nagging voice that grew louder with every passing hour. It pointed out the things my rational mind tried to dismiss. The baby's features, the shape of his nose, the color of his hair. None of it seemed to echo mine. I'd stare at my reflection in the window, then back at the crib, searching for a glimmer of myself, and find nothing. I tried to convince myself it was just new dad anxiety, stress, lack of sleep. I replayed our conversations, our entire history, searching for a crack, a sign that I had missed something. My wife, she was radiant. Exhausted, yes, but glowing with that new mother-luminescence you always hear about. She'd look at the baby with such pure, unadulterated love that my own doubts felt like a betrayal of the highest order. How could I question her? How could I taint this perfect, fragile moment with my ugly, unfounded fears? So I stayed silent. I played my part. I changed diapers. I rocked the baby to sleep. I held my wife's hand and told her she was doing an amazing job. But every touch, every word, felt hollow. The silence was deafening. It stretched between us, a chasm I was too terrified to cross. It felt like I was an actor in a play about my own life, and I'd forgotten all my lines. The happiness in our home felt like a fragile glass dome, and I was holding a hammer, shaking, trying not to bring it all crashing down. The second day was worse than the first. The suspicion had taken root and was now sprouting thorny vines around my heart. I started noticing small things, or maybe I was just inventing them. The way she avoided my gaze for a fraction too long. A quick, almost imperceptible flinch when I came into the room unexpectedly. Was it just my paranoia, or was there something there? I felt like I was losing my mind, caught in a spiral of my own making. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. The joy that was supposed to fill these days was replaced by a gnawing dread. I knew I couldn't go on like this. The pretense was eating me alive. The secret I was keeping, this terrible question mark hanging over our family, was going to destroy us anyway. A slow, painful erosion of trust and intimacy. I realized that the only thing worse than knowing a terrible truth was being tormented by the possibility of one. I had to know, for my own sanity, for our future, whatever that might be. I had to rip the Band-Aid off, no matter how much it hurt. The moment came on the third evening. The house was quiet, bathed in the soft, warm light of the lamp beside our bed. She was sitting up, feeding the baby. It was a scene of pure tranquility, a perfect domestic painting. She looked up at me as I entered and gave me a small, tired smile. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My mouth went dry. All the speeches I'd rehearsed in my head evaporated. There was no gentle way to do this. There was no right way. There was only the brutal, honest truth of what I needed. I walked over and stood by the bed, looking down not at the baby, but at her. The silence stretched for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. I took a deep breath, the air burning my lungs. And then I said the words that had been poisoning me from the inside out. My voice was raspy, barely a whisper. I want a DNA test. It was as if I had dropped a bomb into the quiet room. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. All the color drained from her face. It was like watching a vibrant painting fade to a grayscale sketch in a single, horrifying moment. Her smile vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. Her eyes, which had been so full of warmth just a second before, were now wide with something I couldn't quite decipher. Fear, hurt, guilt. I had braced myself for anything. I expected shouting, screaming, a tirade of accusations about my lack of trust. I expected her to throw something at me, to tell me to get out. I expected a furious denial, a passionate defense of her honor and our love. I was ready for a fight. But that's not what happened. She didn't shout. She didn't cry out. She didn't deny it. The silence that followed my words was heavier, more suffocating than any that had come before. She just stared at me, her face a mask of pale stillness. The baby continued to nurse, oblivious to the world that had just shattered around him. Then, she lowered her gaze to the baby in her arms, clutching him just a little bit tighter. Her shoulders slumped. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet I could barely hear it. It was a fragile, broken whisper, a plea. Please, don't do this now. Now. That was the word that echoed in the silent room. Not, don't do this ever. Not, how could you ask me that? Just, not now. And in that single word, my world tilted on its axis. It wasn't a denial. It was a delay, a postponement. And in that moment, in the wreckage of her expression and the tremor in her voice, I felt the cold, hard certainty of the truth settle in my gut. My suspicion hadn't been paranoia. It had been intuition. The guilt I'd felt before was instantly replaced by a tidal wave of betrayal so profound it stole my breath. It was a physical pain, a sharp stabbing sensation in my chest. Looking at her, huddled over the baby, she looked so small and vulnerable. A part of me, a foolish, naive part, wanted to take it all back, to pretend I never said it. To go back to the torturous but simpler silence of the past 2 days. But I couldn't. The words were out. The question had been asked, and her non-answer was an answer in itself. The beautiful, fragile glass dome of our happy family hadn't just cracked. It had been pulverized into a million tiny, glittering shards. And we were standing right in the middle of the fallout. I just stood there, frozen, unable to speak or move. What do you say after that? What do you do? She wouldn't look at me. She just kept her eyes fixed on the baby, as if he were a shield. The quiet nursing sounds filled the void, a surreal soundtrack to the complete implosion of my life. Please, she whispered again, her voice thick with unshed tears. Let's just get through tonight. We can talk in the morning, please. I numbly nodded, though I'm not sure she even saw me. I backed away slowly, out of the bedroom, and gently closed the door behind me. I leaned my back against it, my legs feeling weak, and slid down to the floor. I sat there in the darkened hallway, the muffled sounds from the bedroom filtering through the wood. The question had been asked, and everything, absolutely everything, had changed. The face of the woman I loved had changed. The face of my life had changed. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that nothing would ever be the same again. The morning would come, and with it, a conversation I wasn't sure I was strong enough to have. But the lie, at least, was over. And a terrible, heartbreaking truth was just beginning. Thank you for listening. If you've ever faced a difficult truth, you're not alone. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. 2 days later, the dam broke. I found her in the nursery, just standing over the crib, her shoulders shaking. She didn't even turn around when I came in. The silence was heavier than anything I'd ever felt. Then she just ... shattered. The sobs were guttural, raw, coming from a place of pure despair. And through the tears, the words tumbled out, disjointed and choked. There had been someone else. It was months before she even knew she was pregnant. A mistake, she kept saying, over and over. A single stupid moment of weakness during a work trip when we'd been fighting. She swore it meant nothing, that it was over before it even began. But the words hung in the air, toxic and suffocating. The truth she couldn't hide forever. It was like a grenade had gone off in the middle of our lives, and the shrapnel was everywhere. Our marriage, which I thought was this solid, unbreakable thing, was just ripped open. The seam was torn so wide, I couldn't imagine how any needle and thread could ever stitch it back together. All the little moments, the shared smiles, the late-night talks, the plans for the future, they were all suddenly tainted, rewritten with this new, ugly footnote. I felt like I was watching a movie of my own life, but the plot had taken a twist so dark I didn't recognize it anymore. Was anything real? That was the question that kept echoing in my head. I looked past her at the tiny baby sleeping in the crib. Our son, my son. He was so small, so perfect. A little frown creased his forehead as he slept, his tiny fist balled up near his cheek. He was completely innocent in all of this, a brand new soul who hadn't asked for any of the chaos he was born into. And in that moment, looking at him, something inside me shifted. The rage that had been a roaring fire for 2 days just flickered out. It was replaced by this vast, hollow emptiness. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just broken. Completely and utterly broken. It felt like my entire world had crumbled to dust, and I was just standing in the ruins, not knowing where to even start, looking for a single piece to pick up. The days that followed were a blur. We lived like ghosts in our own home. We had to. The baby needed care, needed routine, needed a sense of calm that we were faking with every ounce of our being. We moved through the motions, diaper changes, feedings, rocking him to sleep. We spoke only when necessary. Our conversations clipped and functional. Did you sterilize the bottles? He needs a change. The warmth was gone. The easy affection, the inside jokes, the comfortable silence we used to share it was all replaced by this thick, unbearable tension. It was like walking on eggshells on top of a frozen lake, terrified that one wrong step would plunge us both into the icy water below. I started sleeping on the couch. I couldn't share a bed with her. Every time I looked at her, I saw his face. Not the baby's, but the faceless man from her confession. I'd lie there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation we'd had over the past year, searching for clues I'd missed. Was she distant? Did she seem happier? Sadder? It was a form of self-torture, an endless loop of what-ifs and when-nots. My mind became a courtroom where I was the prosecutor, the judge, and the jury, and our entire relationship was on trial. Sleep offered no escape. My dreams were filled with distorted images of her and a shadowy figure, leaving me waking up with my heart pounding and a cold sweat on my brow. The question of paternity was the elephant in the room, a huge, terrifying creature that followed us from room to room. We never said the words paternity test out loud, but they were there, in every glance, in every strained silence. I knew it was the only way to know for sure, the only way to silence the screaming doubts in my head. But I was afraid. I was terrified of the answer. What if he wasn't mine? What would that mean? Could I love a child that wasn't biologically mine? And the even more terrifying question, what if he was mine? What would that mean for us? Would knowing he was my son be enough to erase the betrayal? Would it be a bandage big enough to cover the wound? I felt trapped, caught between two impossible futures. One afternoon, while she was napping, I sat by the crib just watching him. He was awake, his big, dark eyes staring right up at me. He had my mother's nose, I thought. Or maybe I was just willing it to be true. He waved his tiny arms, making a soft, gurgling sound. I reached in and let him wrap his surprisingly strong little fingers around my pinky. And in that simple, innocent touch, I felt a flicker of something other than pain. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't acceptance. It was just connection. A connection to this little human who depended on me, who looked at me with pure, unfiltered trust. It was a pinprick of light in an overwhelming darkness. I realized then that this wasn't just about me and her anymore. It was about him. This baby deserved a father. He deserved to be loved, cherished, and protected, regardless of the circumstances of his conception. The anger and betrayal I felt towards my wife were my burden to carry, not his. He shouldn't have to pay the price for the mistakes of adults. It was a heavy realization, one that didn't magically fix anything, but it gave me a new focal point. It shifted my perspective from my own shattered heart to the tiny, beating one in that crib. The path forward was still completely obscured by fog, but for the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a path at all. The questions still remained. The pain was still there. But my priority became crystal clear. Him, no matter what, my priority had to be him. Thank you for following this journey with me. It's not an easy story to tell, but your support means the world. If you're going through something difficult, remember you're not alone. Don't forget to subscribe for the next part of the story.